the name of God. Hello again, everyone. We're back again with you with another episode of The Fact, the series that has been discussing international issues since few years. Uh, Tonight, we are going to talk about Brexit and outcomes and results, and also consequences of this event in England, Europe, and also all the world. Uh, we have two respected guests tonight with us. Mr. Riaz Karim from England, and also we have Mr. Barry Grossman from Indonesia. I'm really thankful to both of you for joining into our program, and I would like to actually start with Mr. Riaz Karim about the first question. As you know, the people of England has voted for exiting from EU, and they have voted in favor of Brexit. I would like to know about the reason that such a thing happened in Britain.
Well, the thing is that the people voted to leave Europe, but they voted because they were lied to. Um, they were actually lied to that the money that we're going to save, the money that we're giving to Europe will be saved, and we would be able to open a brand new hospital every 3 months. This is the amount of billions of dollars that we're going to save that we're giving to EU currently. There were buses plastered with this messages running all over London. Some of them parked at London Bridge, and so people got into their narrative, so to speak. That we're sitting in EU for absolutely nothing. We could govern ourselves, and we could be independent and trade with any country that we want around the world, and save billions of dollars and have more hospitals and have more social services. So when the referendum came in, they voted to leave. And the problem is that this was not just any referendum. This was David Cameron, the previous prime minister. It was his doing that lost the referendum, and then he basically left Theresa May holding the grocery bag and walked away from it all and resigned. And so Theresa May was a Remainer to begin with. She had said that, Brexit is just a no-go. We're going to remain in the EU. And then suddenly when she became the Prime Minister, she said Brexit means Brexit. So we're going to have to leave the EU, and we will make it happen because the people voted to do so. Nobody's talking about the people who are lied to. Everybody's talking about the people voted to do so, and so we're going to leave the EU, and this is going to be it. And it's been over 2 years now, and they're still trying to leave the EU, and they're not getting a consensus among themselves as to what to do.
Okay, thank you. In here, actually, I would like to jump into the second question, and I would like to ask Mr. Grossman about the subject, which is basically criticisms toward Brexit. Mr. Grossman, you might have heard, and also you might have actually involved in so many criticisms toward Brexit. I would like to know about the different aspects of such criticisms, and about the main topics that are actually involved.
Well, what I would say, and I'll probably touch on your first question as well, is that the criticisms are all over the shop. I don't think that anyone ever really expected that there would be a vote in this referendum for the UK to leave the EU. In fact, the willingness to hold this referendum came out of an internal party conflict in the Tory party, with Cameron being concerned about people defecting to UKIP and making a promise going into the 2015 election that if the Tories won, that this referendum would be held, believing, of course, that that there was no chance that the people of the United Kingdom would vote to leave the EU. Remember, this isn't the first referendum that was held on this issue. Initially, there was a referendum held in 1975 to leave the then European Economic Community. That didn't go very well. Then Sir Goldsmith put together a political party and stood for election in I think it was 89 on the strength of a promise to hold a referendum, and got almost no votes. So David Cameron felt that in order to stop the party hemorrhaging, losing political support to UKIP, he needed to address this issue once and for all, and he thought there was no risk involved in holding this referendum, which, by the way, wasn't in any way a binding referendum. It was an advisory referendum. So the referendum itself was held in an environment of almost complete ignorance. No one had really worked out what voting to leave the EU would entail, what it would mean. Now, the sense certainly that I got from being very far away from the United Kingdom was that there seemed to be two distinct sort of lines of thinking, contradictory, that went into the willingness of people to vote to leave the EU. On the one hand, you had people on the left being concerned that EU politics was being increasingly dominated by the neoliberal ethos, that the European Parliament had been infiltrated by the right, and that they felt that in order to preserve their right in the United Kingdom to pursue liberal policies, they needed to get out. On the other hand, you know, what we have is a conservative party that is probably farther to the right than the EU would ever be. And of course, you had this overwhelming public support beaten up into lunacy, really, by this reaction based almost entirely on immigration policy. So we had these people going at each other from really quite different perspectives, but ultimately the big issue here is one of economy. And there's no small irony here, I think, in that the United Kingdom, to a fault, is willing to pretty much compromise on any principle in order to pursue economic interests. That is, if anything, is probably the dominant characteristic of the Tory party, with its largely neoliberal policies. They're willing to sell arms to tyrannical governments. They're not concerned about the human rights records of those governments. Theresa May has been very open about her view. There should be no connection between arms sales and trade and a country's human rights performance. But when it comes to Brexit, it's like any concerns about economy were thrown out the window in order to press ahead with this agenda. And it's very difficult to see what it is except for a quest for power. That is to say, politicians in the United Kingdom want to have complete power and not be accountable to anybody. And we now have this situation where neither party can really take a position. They're both terrified of a backlash from the electorate because the United Kingdom seems to be quite evenly split down the middle, with sometimes the Leavers being slightly greater in number and sometimes the Remainers being slightly greater in number. This isn't going to be resolved. And meanwhile, what I would say about this, of course, is that this all plays very much to the interest of the United States. Anyone ought to know that a weak Europe and a divided Europe and an isolated United Kingdom is very much in the United States' interests. And I think what unfortunately we might see from this, if in fact the exit does proceed, is a mortally wounded Europe, a somewhat isolated United Kingdom that depends very much on the United States for trade and other political support, and therefore a much stronger United States than we already have. But in terms of your question, criticisms, well, really, where do you want to start? This was a referendum that was held in complete ignorance, without the slightest expectation by the Tory party that there would in fact be a majority vote to leave.
Actually, you have mentioned very interesting points about the complexities of Brexit, and I would like actually to again go ahead to Mr. Karim. Can you explain more about the problematic and complex issues that were somehow consequence or the outcomes of Brexit in England?
The biggest problem that we're facing right now, there's a multitude of problems with Brexit. But one of the biggest problems that the MPs don't seem to agree on is called the backstop. Now, a lot of people do not understand what the backstop actually is. They just hear about the backstop and Northern Ireland, but they don't know what the backstop actually is. So let me unpack that for you for a little bit, okay? When the UK leaves the EU, there's a 310-mile border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which will become the land border between the UK and the European Union. Now, neither side wants to see a return of checkpoints or any towers or custom posts or surveillance cameras at the border, in case it reignites the troubles and disrupts the free cross-border flow of trade and people. But they can't seem to agree on a way to do that. So the UK and the EU agreed to put in place what is called the backstop. And now a backstop is a kind of a safety net to ensure that there is no hard border, whatever the outcome may be of the future trade talks between the UK and the EU. The backstop agreed between these two parties would keep Northern Ireland aligned to some EU rules on things like food products and goods standards that would prevent the need for checks on goods at the Irish border, but would require some products being brought to Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK to be subject to new checks and controls. So the backstop would involve a temporary single custom territory, effectively keeping the whole of the UK and the EU on a single custom, apply indefinitely. And the arrangement would end only with the agreement of both the EU and the UK. So that is the backstop that they're fighting about. This is the biggest thing, or the biggest sticking point they're blaming it on right now, is that some of them say they want the backstop as a safety net. Others say the backstop is a very big sticking point and we can't do that. We would be stuck with it indefinitely if nothing worked out. But in effect, there is, like Barry said, there is cliques or there's groups of people now who are supporting different things. And that is the biggest problem that we have. We have the European research group led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is a thorn on Theresa May's side. And then you have the Labour Party, which wants a completely watered down Brexit so that we can continue doing business with Europe along with the single customs union. And then there's Theresa May, who has a plan which she has agreed with the EU without asking her MPs of what they think of it, and which has come on the table, which was tabled in the Parliament so many times that I even forget now. Seriously, I think about 4 times already it's been rejected, and she's thinking of bringing it the 5th time. Now, the only problem is that whatever the UK government does has to be approved by the Parliament in order to be ratified by the European Union. If there is no consensus here, the EU is going to throw it out. And so this is the reason why we already have, a couple of extensions. Now the extension is at 9 o'clock on 30th of October or 31st of October or something like that. And if nothing happens by then they would have to look at either a no-deal Brexit, which means they just go on their separate ways, and it also means that then customs checks, everything comes into play, including having visas to enter into the EU. So this is a very, very complex issue they're trying to deal with, but they have taken a complex issue and made such a mess of it right now that even they are having problems trying to decipher what they did wrong and what they did right.
All right, thank you. Actually, I would like to again continue the question with you again, Mr. Karim, and then I will go to ask the same question from Brother Barry. I would like to know, with all these complexities that you have explained so far, would it be possible for England to get back to EU in any way or not?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It is an open invitation. Basically, is that if you revoke Article 50, you can come back into the EU with the same terms that you have been here with before. And that has been said by the EU. It has been ratified by the courts. Everything is exactly the same. Even today, they have a petition out that wants to revoke Article 50, and they have over 6 million signatures in a span of 5 days, I believe. 6 million people signed to revoke Article 50. Now the Parliament has absolutely they're going to have to table this, and they're going to have to hear it out in the Parliament. So they don't have a choice but to listen to the people. And don't forget that also the people who were 16 years old and 15 years old then, who stood for EU but could not vote, have now grown up, and because of the current social media and the mess that is in the UK, which even the entire world laughs at because it is such a big mess. Actually, these kids do not want that. They're looking at like the country is being laughed at by everybody in the world because we can't come to an understanding amongst ourselves. And so they are ready to vote to stay in the EU. And that is one of the reasons why Theresa May does not want a second referendum, because she says a second referendum is not going to work. Another thing that Theresa May wants to leave is a legacy that she was part of this and she made it happen. Because when you look at Theresa May's leadership, there is no legacy there. If she leaves her post today, people are going to look at her as a failed prime minister. And that is not something that she wants. So basically, putting all these elements together, we look at a huge mess that needs to be sorted out before it can go out to the EU.
Perfect. Thank you for the explanation. So, Mr. Grossman, actually, Mr. Karim has explained and shed a light on the question about getting back to EU, and he said that it's basically it's something possible, and also I guess the majority of people obviously are in favor of getting back to EU. But I would like to know if either staying in Brexit, staying out of EU, or getting back to EU. I would like to know if either of these two can affect Theresa May's situation or position in England.
Well, I think it's quite clear Theresa May is done for, and with all due respect to Dr. Karim, I think she has established her legacy, and her legacy is one of a complete loser, both as the Prime Minister and as a human being. Her time as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has just lurched from scandal to scandal. And at least David Cameron had the good sense, and he was a man who also never had much good sense, to bail out when he lost the referendum. And the United Kingdom, I think, motivated largely by concerns about immigration more than anything else, voted to leave because he didn't want to preside over the demise of the United Kingdom on his watch. Now, Theresa May, she's jumped on board and she's been driving that train straight for the cliff, and has done really quite a shocking job in that and everything else that she's put her mind to. So her legacy, I would say, is cast in stone. I don't think she's going to be around very long at all. In fact, one conservative politician commented the other day that getting rid of her is sort of like going to the dentist to have a rotten tooth removed. It's not much fun going to the dentist, but the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. There's absolutely no reason why she should still be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and why the Tory government should still be holding power. There should be an election in the offing. The fact that all of those Tory party members in Parliament who have been completely opposed to the various deals that she's cobbled together, nevertheless managed to come to her support when a vote of non-confidence was held is really quite scandalous. The fact of the matter is, they've got a leg in both camp now. The so-called backstop solution isn't a Brexit at all, and involves basically remaining part of the EU for many, many years in terms of trade. On the other hand, a no-deal Brexit would be a catastrophe. It's really quite impossible, I think, for me anyway, to understand how anyone could imagine that there's any economic advantage to stepping out of this union, which was originally established as an economic union, to counter the clout of the United States. It became the largest single economy on the planet, the largest trade bloc on the planet. So it's very difficult to conceive of a scenario where the United Kingdom can be better off economically for leaving. So what they've cobbled together now, what Theresa May has cobbled together, is this backstop. Well, if there's going to be a backstop, I would argue that it should be somewhere in the middle of the ocean that separates all of Ireland from all of England, okay? And what is clear is that now the United Kingdom is running the very real risk that long-standing, very well-justified Republican movements in Ireland and the independence movement in Scotland are gaining speed again. There's a great deal of support growing, and while there may be some troubles that come along with it, the fact of the matter is, if the people of England feel that they have a right to self-determination based on some notion that their cultural values ought to prevail, and that they ought to be entitled to refuse immigrants the right to come to the United Kingdom, that same logic dictates that the people of Northern Ireland should be able to have self-determination, and the people of Scotland should be able to determine their future as well. And there's a lot of people in Northern Ireland, of course, and now also in Scotland who feel that way. So if there's going to be a backstop, well, let it be somewhere in the ocean that separates what is England from Ireland, and let England then deal with the situation that arises in its relations with Scotland. But quite frankly, I just don't think this is going to happen. As Dr. Karim said, the EU has made it very clear that any time the United Kingdom chooses to remain, it can remain, and it doesn't require all of the other EU member countries to agree. It simply requires a unilateral decision on the part of the UK to remain. And quite frankly, it certainly looks from a distance like there's now growing support again for the Remain movement. But of course, militating against that is the very same kind of sentiments that gave strength to the Brexit movement in the first place. And my sense was that it was never about economy. On the political side, it was about politicians wanting to have absolute power without accountability to the European Parliament. But more importantly, on the public side, it was about this sense that certainly a lot of people still have in the United Kingdom, that they don't want immigrants there. They don't want to wake up hearing Adhan. They don't want to see us. They don't want to see Muslims there in many instances. Of course, that's not going to change either. So they were lied to. They've been led on a jolly walk down the garden path that leads to nowhere. The United Kingdom cannot, will not, and is not going to get rid of immigrants. It's not going to happen. People in the United Kingdom are free to embrace the cultural values that define them, just as people who come are free to integrate or not, as the case may be, any more than is required culturally. They're free to live their way. That's what England purports to be based on in terms of its governance. But I don't see this Brexit thing happening. In fact, I never did think it was going to happen.
You mentioned a very
and certainly with people now, some politicians saying that they prefer a hard exit to this backstop deal, with there not really being much support for either. Yes.
Just focus on this interesting point that you said about immigrants in England, because this is also one of the questions that we have concerning the situation of immigrants after Brexit. So I would like to know your opinion, and then again I will get back to Dr. Karim about the same issue. I would like to know if migrants or immigrants in England will get into any problem, or the situation will be even easier after the Brexit, or after getting back to, for example, EU.
Dr. Karim, who I understand, I believe lives in the United Kingdom, is probably in a better position to answer that. But I will say a couple of things. First of all, there already are problems for immigrants from Europe, okay? And a raft of new rules were adopted by the Tory party, restricting the ability of immigrants from the European Union to stay there, and indeed other immigrants to stay there. They had to achieve a certain level of income within the first couple of years and all the rest of it. They set the bar quite high in order to, for people to qualify to stay after they've legally arrived. Secondly, of course, there have been moves underway for a long time under this Tory government to get rid of people who've lived in the United Kingdom for many, many decades, particularly from the Caribbean. The Windrush scandal is almost beyond comprehension. And for the Tory government to have basically authorized the destruction of all related documents is also an astounding development. But so to answer your question, yes, there will be some initial consequences, but ultimately, the United Kingdom is a country of immigrants now. That's what happens when you run an empire that spans the globe for many, many, many years, and that empire collapses and everybody comes to the motherland. That can't be changed. There's no way to get rid of people who migrated lawfully to the United Kingdom and became citizens. They're not going to go away. And I think there certainly are many people in the United Kingdom that have no problem with that. But unfortunately, there's also a very vocal and growing minority that do have a big problem with that. And we hear these stories regularly now, these stories of violence, of people going out, acting out violently against people who either are, who or they think are Muslims or from some other group that somehow offends them. And unfortunately, they seem to be getting nothing more than a slap on the wrist from the British criminal justice system. There was one case a couple of years ago where a man basically started kicking a pregnant woman in the stomach. She was pregnant to twins. She lost her twins, and he ultimately got sentenced with a quite stern lecture, but to a rather short prison term. I think it was about 4 years and 6 months, which basically meant out in 3 for what in effect is a double homicide. And so these people are increasingly being encouraged to act out. And they certainly aren't the majority. They are a minority, but it's a growing problem. It's a growing problem all over Europe, and it's a growing problem in the United States and in Australia and indeed the entire Atlantic world, including Canada and everywhere else. But it's not a problem that's going to go away, and neither are the people. So whether the United Kingdom leaves the European Union or not, the basis on which many people were motivated to vote to leave is not going to be realized. England's not suddenly going to turn into this Protestant nation. On the other side of the coin, I happen to believe it's going to be an economic catastrophe, and so do many other people. Indeed, many of the rather wealthy businessmen who were initially supporting Brexit have cashed in their chips and bailed out and moved their assets abroad. So we'll see. But as I said earlier, my biggest concern with all of this is that essentially a weaker Europe means a stronger United States. And I don't think that that is something that the world can afford to see happen.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Grossman. Here I would like to ask the last question from Dr. Karim. Basically, we have talked about immigrants, and also we have mentioned few points.
Here I would like to ask
mentioned
the
few
last
points
question
about basically about the economic issues that would happen either if we consider immigrants, or either we totally ignore them. So I would like to mix these two questions and ask if England will face any kind of problem concerning economy, either with immigrants or without them, after Brexit, and if there would be any kind of consequences directly from Brexit or not.
Oh, absolutely there is. Absolutely, there, without a question. Because when you look at it right now as we sit, let's start with the National Health Service. The National Health Service has a shortfall of 100,000 nurses, which some of them had come from the EU and were doing a bang-up job. And after this whole big Brexit fiasco, a lot of them left. They were Europeans. A lot of them left and went back to Poland and Romania and whichever country they came from. And because they were not sure whether they're going to be welcome or not. And so it has left a huge hole in the National Health Service right now. Over 10,000 doctors, I think much more than that, are required to get the NHS into full running gear. Over 100,000 nurses. A lot of the companies, HSBC, Nissan, they have basically threatened to move out of their headquarters out of London and either go to Belgium or to the Netherlands. So when you put all of that together, the short-term implication of the hit on the UK economy is absolutely massive, because the loss of jobs, companies moving away, development coming to a standstill, when you put all that together, it is massive. So in the short term, the UK will have to take an absolutely huge hit in order to come back to where he was, or perhaps even go farther. So it is as good as moving the country back about 5 or 10 years or something like that. So it's not easy. The economic implications on the UK are huge, but at the same time, you also have to understand that the in order to, like Barry said, in order to run the single most trading bloc that would counter the United States, the EU also needs UK in it. And this is the reason why the EU has come up with concessions and basically have said that, if you revoke Article 50, you could come back. The EU doesn't want the UK to leave as much as the UK doesn't want to leave the EU. It is just the people who are misguided and they were told lies that is making this so difficult. Because if you look at the subsidies that are currently being provided by the EU to the United Kingdom, there is absolutely massive subsidies. For example, in Scotland, why wouldn't Scotland want to stay in the EU? People who have their lands or forest land where wildlife is living, or untilled land, they get subsidies over 100,000 pounds a year just to keep that land that way and not do anything. These subsidies are massive. When you count everything, it sort of balances what the United Kingdom is paying into the EU as what the United Kingdom is receiving from the EU. So for somebody to come and say that we're going to save millions of dollars if we get out of the EU, that is an absolute and complete lie. And I don't think this should have taken place at all. I think we were better off in the EU, but since they have taken up this issue and made a complete mess out of it, it is going to be very interesting to see how they're going to deal with this further down the road, and how they are going to deal with the economy, because the economy is going to take an absolutely massive hit before it regains control again.
Okay, thank you so very much for the explanation. Mr. Grossman, do you want to add anything? If not, I ask all the questions, and it's up to you in case you want to add anything. And also, Dr. Karim, I will be at your service.
I'd certainly be interested to actually hear Dr. Karim address an issue, given that he lives in the United Kingdom, and that is, to what extent do you feel the original public support for the Lead campaign was based on this sense that some people had that they wanted to return to the good old days of a jolly England with no immigrants, and related to that, have you noticed any increase in intolerance towards immigrants since that view started to be encouraged by those people who are actively supporting the Brexit campaign?
Well, right now I can tell you, both Barry and Ali, the Islamophobia, it is basically at its highest level. With what is going on, the white supremacist groups that are existing in here have gotten more power. They're committing more crimes towards immigrants. They have come out, and on several demonstrations themselves. Nothing is being done about that part. And so we have progressively seen it getting worse rather than better. And I think it is only going to get more worse if this thing happens. So basically, this is to say that everybody is walking on eggshells right now. All the immigrants are they are walking on eggshells because the crime rate is absolutely at its massive top. Islamophobia is right up there. The immigrants are starting to feel unsafe in their own country, which they have lived for the past decades. Their families are starting to be threatened, and it is very dicey at this point, and it's perplexing as to how this will develop further down the road if we are going to leave the EU. What is going to happen then? Because right now, when you look at the parliament, the good old boys club, so to speak, is back. And they don't want to see a woman lead, really. And even though Theresa May has made a complete meal out of Brexit, but the reality is that the good old boys club are not able to see any woman lead them, and so they want the power back, and they want it under any circumstances, even if the country has to fall into pieces. And that is basically what it is.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Kraim, and also Mr. Grossman. It was truly an informative and fruitful talk with both of you. I would like to thank both of you, the respected guests of this episode of The Fact, and I hope we can have you again on the program on next episodes. And also for our viewers and listeners, you can also follow our program in our YouTube channel. And hereby, I would like to put an end to this episode. So I would say goodbye to all of you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.